Welcome back, F-holes. Today we are going to celebrate learning. What a better way to celebrate than sporting our Ithaca College sweatshirt and enjoying the beverage that I enjoyed most there, a nice cold beer. So today we're going to discuss learning styles. I've got 3 learning styles that really apply to music making and music learning. So let's see what we can do to bump up our style on this week's episode. Cheers. Welcome to Advice for F-holes. I am so excited to talk to you about all things strings. We're going to talk to teachers, we're going to talk to performers, we're going to talk to learners of string instruments so that we can figure some of this shit out together. Because playing a string instrument is not always easy, and sometimes it's vaguely inappropriate. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a topic each week, we're going to pull it apart, and I'm going to say what I need to say, and then you're going to comment, and hopefully we'll figure some of this stuff out together. I'm your host, Tracy Emerson. I've been teaching strings for over 30 years. I started playing violin back in 3rd grade, and there are a lot of great things that I've learned over the years, a lot of great things I've shared over the years, and still so many things that I'm puzzled about. So I hope you'll join me on this adventure as we figure some of this out together. Okay, so let's get right to it. There are 3 learning styles, count them 3, that I'm going to talk about today. We're going to talk about your visual learners, your auditory learners, and your kinesthetic learners. What we need to do is embrace the strengths in that dominant learning style realm that you might have. Everybody's going to be a blend of the 3, but there will be some that stick out more than others. And as we explore that today, I'd like you to really contemplate, how do I learn best? What works best for me? Okay, so we're going to embrace the things that are really strong about each learning style. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to discover what some of those disadvantages are to each learning style so that you can strengthen what you have within that, but then also take a look at the learning styles that are not your dominant ones and how we can target those to get a broader learning experience on your instrument. So we're going to start today with our visual learners. When they see the notes written or they see instructions about something to do written in language, in notes, that makes so much sense to the visual learner. They see what to do on paper. They follow instructions really well by reading them. They decode notes and rhythms really easily. Now, that's a great advantage because you're going to learn notes really fast that way. And you're also going to be really attuned when I am modeling something for you to see me do. You're going to replicate that really easily. The other thing is that when you practice, a lot of times if you're the kid practicing in a mirror, it's going to be very relevant to you because you're watching what's happening. You're going to process it really well because you're a visual learner. And that's an awesome strength to have. Those are some really great qualities of a visual learner. Okay, so some of the things that might be setbacks for you, we're going to talk about the fact that you may not always hear or recognize a mistake that you're making. That happens a lot, particularly with students that are just starting to comprehend the idea of key signatures. So a student that's a great visual learner may have missed the boat on the fact that C's are going to be sharp and play all of them incorrectly and not really hear that that's what's going on because their eyes and brain told them what's going on. So again, mistakes that can be made tend to be in that realm. Another thing is that the visual learner, their brain is really busy reading the notes, going forward, getting every note right, which means that again, that pathway is going this direction and not this direction. So the problem is sometimes with your visual learners, they're not listening to what's going on around them. They're kind of on an autopilot with, here's the notes, I'm playing them right. So playing in an ensemble can be really difficult for these students sometimes to make sure that they are, jiving with the rest of the group and not just on autopilot through the music. And another thing that I find can be a little difficult, again, because you're locked into the visual and not so much the auditory, is intonation can be a nightmare sometimes with the visual learners. They're not hearing when they're out of tune. They're just not. And can they? Yes. So in a little bit, we'll be talking about what we can do to kind of balance out those disadvantages for that visual learner. Okay, but now I'd like to move on for a moment. Let's talk about our second learning style. We're going to talk about the auditory learner. Now, I can relate to this one a lot. Am I a good note reader? Yeah. But it wasn't my strength forever. And I learn music way better if it's sitting in front of me and if I can hear it at the same time. So we have a lot of students that are auditory learners in our realm, and because our culture is so reading heavy, reading oriented, not a problem. I think that's a great thing. We tend to forget that this learning style is just so basic and human and necessary for making really good music. So some of the advantages to that auditory learner, they're going to hear and adjust that intonation. So they're the ones that are playing the scale and they just are a little shy and they're going to slip right into where that note should be. They hear ahead of what that's going to sound like. Also, I've found that a lot of the auditory learners have very good tone quality because, again, their ear is guiding what they do. So when they hear a really satisfying sound, that gets reinforced and reinforced. And so that's something they actually listen for as they're playing, kind of automatically. Another thing that I find is really interesting, because these students often listen a lot to music in general. They listen to the piece before they're playing it and learning it. There's so much expression built in with that because they've heard, maybe really good performers playing their piece and they've heard it played with expression. So then they replicate that by ear really, really well. So that's a really great strength that we appreciate in our auditory learners. Now, there are some disadvantages, some hurdles that your auditory kids are going to have. And the biggest one I've found is they get discouraged because they don't learn the notes as fast as your visual learners. They're capable of note reading, but it isn't the, puzzle that they put together and just fly with like your visual learners. They're going to struggle a little bit more with making sense of what's on that page and putting it on their instrument. Sight reading can be really, really difficult and intimidating for a lot of these students. Their playing proficiency very often far exceeds their note reading ability. And that gap can be a real struggle for them and really discouraging. So when you've got this other kid who's played their orchestra music right from the second rehearsal, and you're sitting back there getting lost by measure 4 as an auditory learner, it doesn't feel like you're as good of a musician as that other student. So we need to be really careful with these guys because they are phenomenal musicians. It just doesn't show up at the same time and in the same place. And they don't recognize that other students may have stumbling blocks and difficulty in their learning too, because it isn't as apparent right away. So playing by ear also, this is my third little disadvantage for our auditories. They will play by ear and slide into the pitch an awful lot instead of making a plan and knowing what position they're going to, knowing what that pitch is supposed to be, understanding whether it's a half or a whole step, what the interval might be that they're going to. They hear it, so they slip and slide into it. So that's a thing we're going to address in a few minutes when we talk about kind of developing those disadvantages back into advantages. Okay, so I'm moving over here for a minute so that we can play a little violin. Go Bombers! And we're going to discuss our kinesthetic learners. So these are the people that learn by doing. Okay, so they can look at it on the paper, they can hear it, but until they've physically experienced that half step and what that feels like on their instrument, It doesn't matter how many times you write it in their music. It doesn't matter how many times you play it for them. They have to play it for you. And then experiencing that is going to be what sticks for them. These are the kids that memorize really well. They play it, and before you know it, they're going to be playing it all the time. They've got that favorite song that they're just bashing out at you all the time because their body just does it now, and it does it pretty quickly. Another great strength of the kinesthetic learner is that because they're all over that instrument, they usually have really good dexterity and finger flexibility. They catch those finger patterns really well. So, once you've taught them an arpeggio, they're going to play it on every string. They're going to mess around with them. Another great thing is they are really savvy about bow control and bow divisions. These are the kids that know how to slow that bow down. They know how to slur and pace that slur within that bow. And it really does stick out like a sore thumb sometimes when you're teaching a new skill in that way, and you've got 6 kids in your lesson group struggling to do this crazy string crossing, and you have this other one that thinks it's the best thing that they've ever gotten to do in their entire life, because it's very exciting for kinesthetic learners to get a new groove, and it just feels wonderful for them to play something new that's kind of a challenge. So some of the disadvantages that go along with being a kinesthetic learner is that seeing a marking like rhythm, that can often be a little difficult for them to understand, because until they've physically determined what a quarter note versus 2/8 notes feels like in their hand, that symbol on the page means nothing. So making sure that as you teach those kinesthetic learners, you're doing a lot of shadow bow, for example. So also they may struggle a little bit with sight reading because of that same idea. It's probably going to be fine finger-wise because that's where we spend a lot of our time. But again, rhythm can be something that's a little more abstract. So for kinesthetic learners, those fingers are probably going to work like gangbusters. The bow may be something that's a little trickier for them to get under their belt. And I find that intonation can go either way. You've got some that are going to suffer with intonation, and that's because they know where it's supposed to go by feel. But when we get into more nuanced music making, or if we get into positions where you have to adjust that finger spacing, that can be really troublesome for the kinesthetic learner because they know this is a half step, this is a whole step. Well, then it's not one once we get a little more advanced. So those are the students that have to be clued into how that feels before they actually are taking off on the page. Alrighty, my friends, we are going to take a pause right there. Next week, we're going to come back to this whole topic and see what you figured out. So get your instrument out, play around with different ways of exploring a new piece and see what works for you and what doesn't, so that we can figure out some new ways to learn on your instrument. Thank you for listening to Advice for F-Holes. Please subscribe and share your comments below so we can have a great conversation.